Hello and welcome back to Agriconnect TV. I'm joined by a very special guest, the NFU President Tom Bradshaw. Tom, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us at Agriconnect TV.
No, great to be here.
Obviously, you delivered your speech to people today. What was the main message that you were trying to get across at the show?
Look, we all know what a central role farming plays in our rural economies, and I think that here we have the supply chain today, and if farming sneezes, the whole supply chain is going to catch a cold, and it's really trying to bring that strength of unity with that supply chain, getting them to lobby their MPs about the impacts they're seeing within their businesses, because united, we are a really powerful voice. But if we're divided, then it's far more difficult. And so it's really that call for unity, but also for the supply chain to get involved.
Tom, we talk a lot about farmer confidence and it being quite low at the moment. Obviously, when you're speaking to manufacturers here, what is the general kind of messaging that you're getting from them?
Well, I think if you see the news this week, lowest tractor sales for 25 years, I think that is very symptomatic of the challenge that farming's faced. We've had a really difficult period of weather. We've got the politics that's been at play, the policy, the geopolitical situation. And if farmers don't have confidence, then they don't invest for the future. We live hand to mouth, year to year, rather than looking at where we're going to be in 5 and 10 years' time. And I think that that's symptomatic of the challenges that farming is facing. And I think what we hear from a lot of suppliers, although some have been a bit more upbeat, but is generally that the phones have stopped ringing. That particularly, I think a lot have been put on hold until the budget, but then since the budget, rather than just putting things on hold, farmers are cancelling orders. They're cancelling those sheds that they thought they were going to build and the machinery that they may be investing in. And it's really about the affordability, that it's just, there is no cash.
We can't ignore the political backdrop. Obviously, it was a key focus within your speech today, and this ongoing row around inheritance tax. How much of a shadow is it over this industry right now?
It's a massive shadow, and we already know, if you look at our confidence figures that we published back last April, we were at the lowest confidence we've ever seen in the industry. Now we're going to get those figures again relatively imminently, and I think it's going to have fallen even from a record low. And I just think the shadow that the industry is facing, I had a big poultry processor on the phone last week saying, people are just saying, why do I bother? Why should I invest? Because then I build my balance sheet. Then I'm going to be liable for more inheritance tax. And so at the moment, I think there's this real sense of lethargy and just there's genuine concern about how farms are going to continue. Now, if you're going to live for more than 7 years, or if you think you're going to, there is a way for a lot of people to plan through this. But those that are at the end of their life, they're the ones that I think this is an absolutely abhorrent policy and is completely unacceptable. So I think the shadow will continue until the government really start talking, and we have had meetings at the highest level with the Prime Minister, but we've got to sit around the table with the Chancellor.
For those watching, people are interested to know, how are the NFU going to be continuing that momentum and continuing that conversation that, we're not going to walk away from this, the sector isn't going to walk away. How are you going to do that? What have you got planned? Yeah,
and I think some of that is maybe government hoped at Christmas this would all go quiet, and I guess what they've seen in the new year is that it's certainly not gone quiet. There continues to be a lot of activity. I think the strength of feeling is growing, and look, I absolutely understand the anger that is there in the industry today. And so we've obviously had our Lamma event today where we've got the pledge, and we really would like suppliers that are involved in supplying into the agricultural industry to sign up to that pledge to show the strength of power when we all come together. We've got activity on the 25th of January where we're letting individual counties organise their own events. A lot of members have said, look, we just want to show our support. How can we be involved? And those local events are going to be planned for whatever those counties want to do. And so there's various different events going on around the country. We're trying also to bring the whole of the upstream supply chain together. Now, this is a big ask, but...
And how important is that, Tom, though, to get that supply chain on board?
I really feel it's a critical element, because if they are worried, and that's what this poultry processor was really concerned about, was farmers saying, I'm not going to build a new shed. And we know that we've got to invest. And when the government had in their manifesto about food security is national security, that really gave me hope. But an industry bereft of confidence is not going to deliver for food security. Whereas if we're investing today, we deliver food security for the future. And if those processors, if those retailers are genuinely concerned about where their food is going to come from, where their raw ingredients are going to come from, they need to demonstrate their support for the industry. And I think it's also the out-of-home sector as well. They can demonstrate their support. Big customers of British farming, and actually having their voices, if they are willing to do this with us, will really demonstrate to government just how big this concern is. And obviously Morrison's at the weekend came public.
That's what I was going to pick up on, in terms of, obviously Morrison's was the first retailer to give that kind of open public support for farmers, and showing that they share their frustration and anger, in their words, around this inheritance tax row. Slowly other retailers emerging, showing messages of support. Does that give you a bit of confidence that we're moving in the right direction?
Yeah, we've been working with a lot of these retailers since November, and I know that several of them have been lobbying the Chancellor, but they wanted that to be behind closed doors. I think what we've seen with Morrison's is probably the first example of anyone going public. They'd already committed that they would sign up to the industry letter. We've got other retailers that have also committed to that. We've got processors that have committed, and now we're working with the wider supply chain to really build the power. And the food industry worth I think the latest figure is £168 billion. That business is not based here if you don't have the raw ingredients produced here.
But surely when the Treasury designed this policy coming through in this proposal, that they were aware of that it was having a wider sector impact, it would.
I think they've completely misunderstood the impacts of the policy. And I'm still calling it naivety and ignorance rather than...
How long can we call it that? Because that's something I wanted to pick up on, Tom, in terms of, you constantly reiterate when I've asked you, do you think this is government naivety? Do you think they really understand the human cost of this? But how long can we go along with that line? Or is this really, a political standpoint?
So I don't think it was ever designed to be a vindictive tax. We know the longer it stands, the more it looks like to our members, to those farmers, that it's vindictive. But I don't ever believe it was designed that way. They hadn't done enough homework. I mean, if anyone listens to the Balls and Osborne podcast, Osborne said he was continually fed this policy over the desk by the Treasury officials. It's a Treasury hobby horse, and yet, unfortunately, the Labour Party lapped it up and they didn't interrogate it enough as to the impact. And that is my real frustration, is that if they'd done a bit of homework on this, if they'd done any consultation with industry, there's no way they would have gone ahead with the policy.
So right now, what is the call to action? Is it a consultation? Is it, we've got this technical review coming up. Do you want to kind of see more nitty-gritty detail of that? What essentially is it that you want?
So we know that it's really, really interesting. They say they can't consult on tax policy, but they are doing a technical consultation around trusts. So again, the majority of the farming organisations came together and wrote to the Chancellor last week, asking for that technical consultation to be broadened to look at the impacts of the proposals to APR and BPR. And a consultation is clearly what we're asking for. But we've offered solutions to this privately and to go into the Chancellor with solutions, but at the moment she hasn't met with us to discuss them. So we are still asking for that consultation, because I think that what they will recognise then is the level of unintended consequences that are contained within this policy. And what I am very clear about is that generation that are given everything to producing this country's food, that don't have 7 years to plan. This is an abhorrent policy, and we will not go quiet while they are in the eye of this storm.
It was interesting, the language used by the Secretary of State at the Oxford Farming Conference last week, in terms of that investment within the sector. And actually, investment, they say, is not happening because of profitability, and actually the fear and the uncertainty of inheritance tax has nothing to do with it. I just want to get your sense of, what do you think of some of the reforms that they highlighted to try and boost profitability within the sector, such as planning reforms, such as public procurement, and really promoting British produce? Do you think that goes far enough to try and get this sector profitable?
Where I want to agree with the Secretary of State is we know we'd had numerous challenges previously. We know confidence was already at rock bottom last April, and that wasn't caused by the current government. So some of what he's saying is correct, but make no bones about it. When you promise not to do something, and then you bring in a change that you've promised not to make, and you create a huge level of uncertainty and genuine worry about how that cash is going to be found, then you do limit investment and you limit the ability to plan for the future. Within the policy, if it was a peacetime speech that he'd given and everything was fine and we were making profit, then the gene editing bit's good, the planning bit's good. Look, public procurement, we'd like to see more British going into public procurement, but the issue with that is the funding. The budget isn't big enough for farmers to be able to make a profit. Farmers and growers.
It's a huge logistical challenge to meet that target as well. It shouldn't be underestimated.
No, massive logistical challenge. But unless they're going to make a profit from supplying that market, they'd rather export it to other markets. So I think that's the real challenge here, is that the budget for providing the food for our public services and public organisations is simply not big enough. And so we've got to look at that fundamental problem that providing fresh ingredients and good healthy food for the NHS should be an absolute priority, but unfortunately that curtailed budget makes it really difficult.
Would you in a way then say there were conflicting narratives in that speech? On one hand, food production is really important, food security, it's the number one thing that farmers need to be doing is producing food, but then actually some of the reforms and actually some of the underlying language used is contradicting that.
But the bit that really contradicted it was the fact that you go say we're going to diversify, and I've actually picked that up on the Today programme that morning, because the farmer that had spoken before me had talked about diversification. And I was like, the fundamental problem here is that we're supporting food production by diversified businesses. That is fundamentally wrong. It should be there for the extreme situation where there is a climatic disaster and you prop it up from your other business. It shouldn't be a day in, day out. It's a position that you continue to subsidise it. So that is a real concern. This food production itself used to be underpinned by the BPS payments. Those BPS payments have just practically gone. So there is nothing now that is making farmers think we will continue to take the risk for food production. And unless we get the margin from producing that food, don't underestimate what that means for farmers' willingness to invest in food production.
But how do we get that margin? How do farmers get a better margin from retail? And it's a very difficult task to achieve.
I was in the US in September, and it was really interesting that one of the bodies we met over there in the US turned around to us and said, your challenge is you've got the most competitive retail sector in the world. And that's coming from the US. Fundamentally, our food prices are too cheap. And I hear regularly that retailers' profits are exorbitant. But
interesting, Tom, when we, in a press huddle afterwards with the Secretary of State, when it was asked, does this mean, if you're trying to get farmers better margins, does this mean for food prices to go up? And he didn't say that.
Yeah, I know, this is the worry.
So what is the plan?
Well, but you see, I don't think there is a plan. But what I was just about to say is we regularly get told retailers' profits are exorbitant. But if you look at their margin on groceries, it's about 3 to 4%. And the underlying challenge here is that I genuinely believe we've got the third cheapest food in the world. We've completely reformed our agricultural policy, so there's no support for food production. And unless we start to get proper returns from the marketplace, then there will be a lot of people saying, why should I bother? And they may well say, well, look, we'll take the SFI, we'll take Elms, and we'll focus on our diversified businesses and stop the food production element. I mean, that's completely contrary to what the government want, and it doesn't deliver that food security. So I think the whole supply chain is responsible for making sure we get fair returns, but the consumer, unfortunately, is a critical element of that, and they have to be willing to prioritise British and perhaps pay a little bit more. But I also understand how under pressure our average consumer is, so they don't have a lot of disposable income, and this is the vicious circle that we're in. But the competitiveness of our retail sector is one that creates a lot of challenges for farmers producing the food.
No, it's a very, very good point. Obviously, away from your presidency role, you are an arable farmer. I'm interested in terms of your own business. How, for 2025, how is everything that's going on impacting your kind of plans and decisions? And, we're here today. There are thousands and thousands worth of kit here, which requires significant investment, but also it's so much productivity and innovation going on here as well, which is something that we really want to kind of push forward positively within the sector. So it's so difficult to kind of.
And that's where this shadow hanging over the industry is so sad, because actually what we should be talking about is thriving, profitable businesses that are reinvesting, adopting the technology that's going to make us more sustainable, and that's a really exciting picture, attracting new entrants. I mean, who's going to want to come into an industry that's whinging all the time?
Well, it's a theme that's been cropped up time and time again in interviews this morning, is that what the next generation got to look forward to in this sector at the moment, when there's constant doom and gloom and this negative perception of the industry, which is a real worry in itself.
No, it is. And so in our business, look, the blow in the budget, we lost over 70 grand out of our contract farming businesses overnight. And the cash flow pressure in our arable business today is the greatest I have ever seen. It's really, really difficult.
Bad weather and everything else going on.
And so I know that the challenge members are facing on the ground is very, very real. We obviously got our BPS payments early. That money's now gone. And some are haven't had their countryside stewardship payments yet, and all this stuff just compounds the level of concern. I was one of the farms that had a farm equipment technology fund grant for a direct drill. I've chosen not to invest. I've chosen not to spend that money because I genuinely, with that 70 grand missing out of our cash flow, I can't carry on making the investments that we would have done previously. So
Tom, when you hear, the Treasury say we're putting money back into working people's pockets, do you still think that they understand that farmers are part of that working people?
I think they have a really mixed image of farming, and I think they see landowners as being a sort of landed gentry. They don't understand that farmers, that many of people here will be working 60, 70, 80 hours a week and thinking nothing of it. But they've always worked for the future, for their family, for giving that business on. And suddenly it's that bit that they think has been taken away from them. And that is what's saying to, well, it's not that they mind the hard work, it's just that they can't see what they're creating and how they're going to deliver that for the future. And I think that's the bit that has really, really stung, is that all farmers have ever done is reinvest everything in that business for the future. And suddenly there is this real question of, well, what is the point? And I mean, the reason I'm confident
with that investment, have taken on huge amounts of debt, which is not going away now.
When we talk about the scale of the challenges, and they are at the moment, I don't think we've probably seen a time where the challenges have ever been so great. The one thing that genuinely gives me hope is that we have 70 million people living on this island, and how we feed those people, how we produce their food, is absolutely essential. Now, imports, yes, they're always going to be part of it. But domestic food security, domestic food production is a critical part of producing the food for those 70 million people. When you look at the impact of climate change globally, you look at the geopolitical situation, investing in domestic food production is something government will have to do because they cannot take the risks just to rely on other people to produce that food for us. So we're going through a hell of a challenge at the moment. But I still genuinely believe that when we get out the other side, there is real reason for hope and belief that we can get to that thriving, profitable industry that members and farmers want to invest in for the future.
I think a lot of people are holding on to that hope, though, aren't they? That's
we need to. And I couldn't do my job if I didn't believe there was a light at the end of this tunnel, and if I didn't believe there was something we can deliver that give members that opportunity to run profitable businesses, then probably you get to a point of not being the right person to do this role. I still genuinely believe that I think we can see some change to the inheritance tax proposals, but I also think that once we get beyond that.
Do you genuinely believe that though? Because that's what I was saying. April 2026. Do you think we'll be in the same situation that we are currently?
No, I genuinely believe that there is room for some change. Now, I don't know how big that change is. Yeah, no, it is a gut feeling. It's not. I know I can't make that promise because I have nothing to do that, to sort of no foundations for that. But I genuinely believe there is hope to get some change. But I also look I believe the biggest challenge this industry faces is import standards, and I have no problem if we're standing on a level playing field. But if we're expected to compete, and I use the poultry industry as our example at the moment, but if we're expected to compete with Polish poultry, Thailand, Brazil, when we've got the highest standards in the world, we can't do that. And I do have a problem here with the retailers because they're the ones that are driving those standards higher. They want reduced stocking densities, and I've got no issue if every bird in this country is kept at 30 or 32 kilograms per metre squared, but then I expect every bit of poultry sold within that retailer to be produced to that same standard because that enables the marketplace to function. Whereas at the moment, when it's processed or ready meals, they're very happy in many instances for that to be imported poultry. That's unacceptable. And we have to get to a point where we've got a fair marketplace that gives us an opportunity for fair returns. And when we talk about the returns to farm, I think that's one of the fundamental differences that could set us on a much firmer foundation.
You talk about those conversations with retailers, but also it's having conversations with consumers as well and getting them to understand, which is very difficult because I was at a seminar the other week and a large proportion of shoppers rely on government policy and businesses to almost hold that responsibility when it comes to, say, for example, net zero and climate thing. They expect, as they go into the shop, that to be done for them.
But somebody's got to be willing to pay for that. None of this comes for free. And I think that we are at an absolutely pivotal time where we've given everything. The industry has nothing left to give. And we're all happy to make the changes to make us more sustainable for the future. But the absolute number one priority, number one part of sustainability is profitability. And unless we get that, we aren't going to be able to invest in the future, reduced or more efficiency and reduced impact on the climate because there is nothing there.
The overriding argument from government is that they are trying to obviously tackle this black hole. They are trying to raise funds to support public services, which the Secretary of State constantly, in his speeches is saying, rural communities will allow these public services. So that is the argument they're going off. What do you say in response to that?
So I understand how difficult the fiscal environment is, and I genuinely think it's in a really challenging position. But we would probably look to provide a solution that still raises the money. It's just that tax should be affordable. You shouldn't have to sell your business to pay the tax that's being demanded of you, and that's where we are today. So we would like to look at solutions that, Dan Needle proposed a solution which was done on the sale of the asset. Well, at least then you've got the money to pay the tax, and that would probably be a far more sensible position to end up in. And so, look, I recognise they're in a challenge, but you've also got to think that this 500 million is a rounding error in the public expenditure. Even the OBR have highlighted the high degree of uncertainty about how much money will actually be raised by this tax change. That's not something that you should damage an industry over. And I just think they've underestimated the scale of the damage that they can do to the industry with that change that they're proposing at the moment.
And obviously there are so many other challenges. We picked upon some of them throughout this interview, but foot and mouth disease, that case being found in Germany, that's a worrying thing. That's in the back of livestock keepers' minds right now, that disease threat. Also you've got Schmallenberg, blue tongue, these ongoing issues that are going on a daily basis, plus this big issue of inheritance tax.
Yeah, and look, it's really important that we focus on that day job as well. And Friday afternoon when I found out about the foot and mouth in Germany, that we immediately put our heads together, and Saturday lunchtime we responded with a statement on the impacts. Luckily it was reported, and obviously restrictions on exports from Germany were immediately put in place because they lost their FMD-free status. We've now had a statement today which all personal imports from Germany are restricted, but does that go wide enough? We were asking for all personal imports without a veterinary certificate to be banned, because until we know the picture in Germany and in wider Europe, let's not take any risk with this disease. We all have those awful memories of what happened 20 odd years ago. We do not need to go back to that. And we're not prepared to deal with that. When you highlight there's other challenges, AI as well as blue tongue, Schmallenberg, APHA under a lot of pressure. We've got to do everything we can to keep this disease out. And so, yeah.
And Tom, what do you think are the other priorities? So we talked about the disease threats, but what other things? If inheritance tax put to one side to one moment, what are just the key things that this government needs to get a hold of?
So as I say, in their manifesto, the bit that I really grabbed hold of was that food security is national security. There was also in there, we only want to import food produced to the highest animal health and welfare standards. Core standards within trade are absolutely essential. That's something which I think is fundamentally wrong at the moment. Fairness in the supply chain can't just be words. The whole supply chain needs to look at the level of risk that people are now exposed to.
And some of those, the efforts that have gone with the dairy contract legislation has come under fire in recent weeks in terms of, does it go far enough? Is it the right setup there for that fairness to happen?
I don't think you're ever finished on this. I think all you're ever doing is making progress. I don't think you don't suddenly get to a point and say, right, that's job done. Look, we welcome seeing the dairy contracts, but it's been amended before it's even in place, and that's slightly concerning that has happened. But I think that we have to look at what delivers fairness. And I talked about the poultry example. That is fairness to me. If it's the retailer that's demanding the standards of production are changed, then they should be made to sell all of their products should be sold to that standard. The moment we saw a shortage of free-range eggs, what happened? We brought in Italian eggs that don't have the same standards, and that's a massive concern because it doesn't give a reason to invest in domestic production. So I think that's when I look at fairness. They're the elements that I'm really focusing on, because it's not about price, but it's about enabling the market to operate properly and fairly, and that's what we need to do.
Obviously, you want to end on a more optimistic, positive note. Obviously, huge presence of arable farmers here. What do you think are the three top key opportunities for arable farmers in 2025?
Wow, things
that you are personally looking forward to as an arable farmer as well.
Well, I tell you, I genuinely think we are facing one of the most challenging periods that I've known in the arable sector. And without the BPS propping up, it gets really, really worrying about the returns you're getting from that business. And so, look, we've always.
Some of the innovation is
Where's
exciting
the
to
cash
see.
to invest in it? This is so. I'd love to be standing here saying, well, we should be doing X, Y, and Z. But I think that today it really is about survival, and the markets are incredibly low, the commodity markets for cereals, which make it really, really difficult to find that money for investment. So I think that I'd love to be standing here saying the cereal sector is going to have a great year, but I know it is, without seeing a massive turnaround in the markets, that's going to be challenging. And I think obviously the confidence is something that, do you then invest for the future? Do you? And we're actually growing a lot of peas this year, just because it's probably the highest risk crop we can ever grow. But if we get it right, it might make us some money. And but that is rolling the dice. It's it really is quite risky. But
And finally, Tom, obviously you started off today presenting at Lamma, really trying to get supply chain on board with the inheritance tax debate. What is your final message to suppliers here?
Well, to suppliers and to the wider industry, look, I genuinely believe we only win this as a united industry. The pressure that we can put on government from the supply chain, supplying into farm, and from the processors and retailers buying from farm, speaking with one voice, is going to put a massive amount of pressure onto the Treasury to say you've got this wrong. And that's what we're trying to coordinate now, is that really united front from all parts of the the food and farming industry. And I think that is our strongest hope now of trying to get the Treasury to listen.
And sadly, obviously, the Chancellor, Rachael Brown, isn't here today, or is the DEFRA Secretary, Steve Reed, the Shadow DEFRA Secretary, is here. But if they were here, what would your main message be to them?
I know that we've had conversations with Steve Reed. We have to meet with the Chancellor. She has to be willing to sit around with the table. We're reasonable people. We want a reasonable solution. We understand their predicament, but the policy in place today is not fair, it's not reasonable, and the human element is unacceptable.
It'll be interesting to see how the campaign develops. Thank you so much, Tom, for your time. Appreciate it. Thank you.